Hi everyone, and welcome back to Octopus Builds, where we are building out the Trident project for the fictional company Octo Pet Shop. Now, over the past couple of episodes, we've really been honed in on various security policies. We have thus far created a series of teams to restrict access, so only developers can deploy to dev and QA, but they can't deploy to staging or production. The web admins, they can deploy to production, but they cannot make any sort of deployment process changes. We have also configured it so if necessary we can skip dev and QA if there's an emergency bug fix release. And finally we set up in the last episode the config as code feature, so we could have enforcement of requiring an approval prior to making a change to a deployment process, and that's accomplished by leveraging branches and pull requests and branch protection policies. The final step is within the security team. They have the requirement where every deployment to production requires a approval from the change approval board, or the CAB. Now, the CAB concept, it can be rather controversial at times because there are a host of opinions out there that believe that CAB is not something that you should need once you get into a more modern DevOps approach. However, that being said, we also want to be realistic and make sure that we support any number of those different types of cases, because as much as I wish I could say you don't need a change approval board and going through that entire process where you have to go to a meeting, you have to get you have to basically tell people this is what's going to change, this is the whole process we use for testing, this is everything that's going to happen, and so on and so forth, and then getting kind of a sign off, that final sign off on it. We can't have something like that. Sorry, as much as I wish we didn't need something like that, the truth of the matter is for a number of different users and a number of different customers, that is the reality of life. So like it or leave it, like it or hate it, we do need to have something along those lines. In addition, we want to make sure that that is enforced within Octopus Deploy. So what we're going to be doing today is configuring the ServiceNow integration. And ServiceNow is going to represent the approval process. And we're going to talk through a number of different reasons why that is a preferred approach over some of the legacy approaches that we've seen in the past. But first, let's configure ServiceNow. So the first thing that we want to do is you need to ensure that your instance has ServiceNow integration enabled. And that is done by making sure that you have the latest and greatest license key with the ServiceNow integration added to that key. That's actually a separate thing that you have to make sure that you configure. I already have this configured on my particular instance, and so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to enable my ServiceNow integration. So now it's enabled, but what I now need to do is I need to add a connection from Octopus Deploy to ServiceNow. Now to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I am going to set up a developer instance. So if you go to developer.servicenow.com, you are presented with this screen. Now I have already gone ahead and I have created an account for myself. And what this will do is now I have my accounts. So what I need to do is I need to request an instance, and this will create a developer instance. I do not know. Let's go with San Diego, because that's the latest release. And what this is doing is this is creating a personal developer instance that I can use, and that this is what I'm going to be connected to through my ServiceNow integration. For our customers who are going to be using this in a production setting, obviously you wouldn't be using a personal developer instance because that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's setting up the instance as we speak. If I were to click on my username, I would actually get the fulfilling request as well as the what's going on any sort of these different types of things. A couple things to note if you are setting up this instance is that an instance with no activity for over 10 days will be claimed back into the pool. What that basically means is that instance will be destroyed, and you'll have to basically rebuild what we're about to do from scratch again. In fact, that actually happened to me because of a number of reasons. I couldn't access my instance over 10 days and it just destroyed it. And so now I have created a whole new instance. And there is the username and the password. And so let's go ahead and let's open up the developer instance. All right, we have the instance up and running. So let's go ahead and let's start creating the necessary bits we need to create in order for this to work. So let's jump back over here really quick, and we want to add the URL. We need to add a service account user and create an OAuth client. So first up, let's go ahead and let's add in this URL. And now we need to create the OAuth client ID. So let's go ahead and let's open this up, and we want to do, let's just type in not Q. Let's type in OAuth, and we want to come to application registry. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and favorite this in case I have to do this again. Come to application registry, and then what we want to do is we want to create a new OAuth API endpoint for external clients. So it'll be the very first option. And let's just call this Octopus. I'll call this Octopus Builds. You can call it whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. The most important thing to make note of is that the application should be at the global level. If you have it at any other level, you're going to run into some rather interesting things. Let's go ahead and click on Submit. And now we have the client ID as well as the secret. So I'm going to go ahead and copy first the client ID. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy in the secret so I can actually view the password. I'm going to go ahead and copy this in. You might be wondering, it's like, oh my gosh, you're showing the password. Yeah, I am. I'm actually going to be deleting this as soon as this is done. Same thing with the service account user, password. So I'm not too concerned with it. So I'm going to go ahead, and I don't really need to update anything. So I'm just going to go away, and the next thing I need to do is I need to create that service account user. So let's type in users. I'll be under user administration. I'm going to go ahead and add users to favorites again. Click on users, and I want to go ahead and click on new. So for the user ID, I'm just going to call this octopus.ServiceNow. I'm going to call this first name Octopus, last name's Deploy. Now here's the most important bit: is I need to check this check mark that says web service access only. And what this is telling ServiceNow is that this is going to be a service account. So let's go ahead and click on Submit. And we need to just search really quick, Octopus, maybe tab. Oh, there we go, octopus.ServiceNow. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on this. And I want to copy in a couple things. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to copy in the user ID. The next thing I need to do is now I need to set a password. So I'm going to go ahead and generate a new password and copy this in, and that's rather long. I guess I don't have to show it to everyone. We'll just kind of see, oh, that is rather long. And from here, I can come in here and I can test this account just to make sure that everything is good to go. So unable to authenticate with ServiceNow unauthorized. So let's go ahead and hit OK. I'm going to go ahead and hit save just to be sure. Unauthorized. So that can happen. And what we need to do is we actually need to grant that user, let's save the password, we need to grant the user some additional permissions. Okay, so I can go ahead and close this. I'm going to add this role. I'm going to add some roles to this user. And what we care about is change requests. So they're going to be a change manager. So I'll go ahead and hit OK, hit save, and we can see all of these roles were added into the ServiceNow. Perfect. So let's test this one more time. Connection is now successful. So I've granted the appropriate permissions, I've done all the appropriate bits, and now the service account has all the appropriate permissions that I needed to use. So let's hit OK, and we are done configuring the ServiceNow connection. So everything has been connected. One of the nice things with our ServiceNow integration is it doesn't require you to have to install anything on the ServiceNow outside of creating a few, like the OAuth user and the service account user. Now, because this is enabled, we've also enabled a few other things. The first thing we need to do is we need to verify that we want to prevent people from being able to deploy to production without a change request. And we can do this by let's go into the environments, and what we want to do is let's go ahead and click on Edit. Now with ServiceNow, now that that has been enabled, I have change controlled. And so I can come in here and I can say this is now change controlled. And what this is saying is that in order to deploy to production, I need to require permissions. I need to get approval from the change as a change request. Now that's only one part of the process. The other thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and configure the Trident application, and we can come under, I believe it's Settings General, and what this is also saying is that this also requires permission. And what we can do is we can select the ServiceNow connection, and let's click on Save. And so we need both of those things to be configured in order for everything to work correctly. All right, so we have configured this, and we happen to have a deployment ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and promote this. Now, unlike a lot of the other configurations that we've done in the past, this doesn't require a whole new release to be created because this type of configuration sits outside of the deployment process. That is one advantage to this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Deploy, and what we're going to see is that a change request has been required, and what it has done is it's actually paused the deployment and is now not allowing anything else to happen. It is an Octopus Deploy. What it did is it couldn't find a change request for this, and so it automatically created one for us. So I can click on this, and it will send me over to my ServiceNow instance. And it's saying I'm deploying Trident version 102 to production. And what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and assign this to I'm just going to call it, I think it's just software. Return. Yeah, user ITO. That's fine. Actually, no, that's the I meant to assign it to a group. That was my mistake. Software. That's what I meant to do. So you want to assign it to a group for approval, and the next thing I need to do is I need to request approval. Now you'll notice while this is happening, if I come back here, this is not going to get picked up. We need to get approval before anything happens. So now it's waiting for approval, and I am going to select this user, and I am going to approve this. Now in a non-personal development instance, it would actually be users that would match the customer's users. It wouldn't just be a random number of different users. Now one interesting thing is because this is a again personal developer instance, they have their own workflow associated with this. So I am going to also approve this over here. So I needed actually 2 approvals to do this, which I thought was rather interesting. But again, this is just the rule that has been set up in this change approval process. Now I do have this, and this is now approved, and that's great. But again, this is not picking it up. This is the final piece of the puzzle. It needs to be moved into the implement stage for it to be picked up and processed. Any change request that is not in the implement stage, basically the Octopus Deploy will sit and wait and wait and wait until it moves into the implement stage. If it moves to the review stage, it will actually reject it and it'll say, hey, that you can't use that change request. In a future episode, what we'll do is we'll actually add in a prompted variable to show you how to manually pass in a change request if it already has been created. So we're going to sit here and we'll wait for the packages to acquire. Again, it has gone into the implement stage, and once this is done, we will need to review it and then close it. So again, all of this is handled outside of Octopus Deploy. Octopus Deploy just periodically checks to make sure that that change request is in an appropriate stage. Once it has been picked up, and what I mean picked up, it's processing the actual application, the actual deployment, then it's not going to check it again unless it goes into like a manual intervention or something like that. You know, now that I'm thinking about this, this is how it should work. I was just waiting for have to wait for the calamari to be extracted. It'll take just a couple seconds for this to finish up running. But this is how you get an approval. You have to get the CAB approval. Now, in the real world, chances are you don't want to create that change request when you're going to production. Maybe you do. That is a fairly common use case. But you might want to create it after the fact. And so within Octopus Deploy, let's go to our documentation and we can show you a couple of things while we're waiting for this to finish running. ServiceNow. Has to be one word. Can't be two words because it's just, there we go. So this will walk you through what will happen if a approval is required. So if project's change controlled and the environment's change controlled, approval required for deployment. But it's not, the project's not change controlled, but the environment is, no approval is required. If the project is change controlled, but the environment is not, no approval required. And it walks you through all the various licensing. And the one thing that we are looking for is we want to add in this. I think it makes more sense. Let's go ahead and just reuse this. We have a variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter in a new variable called octopus.servicenow.changerequest.number. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the editor inside of here. I said I was going to do this in a future episode, but it makes more sense to do it now. I'm going to prompt for a value. And so I'm going to say ServiceNow change request. That's the label. Give it a control type of a text box. It is required, but I want to define the scope and only have this run for production. So what I'm doing here is, let's go back to previous, is I'm making this a prompted variable. So let's click on Done and click on Save. And what we're going to do is we're going to reuse this change request for another deployment. Now the nice thing is that since I have my hotfix branch ready to go, I'm going to do 1.0.4. Just to demonstrate this, we're first going to go to staging, and we will not be presented with that change request because we did not configure staging to require a change request before we do the deployment out there. But when we go out to production, what we can do is we can reuse that change request number for future use. So I can reuse that change request number if that change request number is still associated with a change request that's in the implement stage. If I were to move this over to the review stage or the close stage, it would not, what I'm about to do will not work. So it is adding and removing both of these things. It should do this pretty quickly. So this is one of the very nice things about the change request process is, sorry, I meant to click on this. Again, we don't have to modify our deployment process outside of adding in that additional variable. If I didn't want to do what I'm about to do, then I wouldn't need to add in that variable, and I wouldn't have to change anything in my process at all. Let's go ahead and deploy to production. Now, because I made this a prompted variable, now you see a new field has appeared called parameters, and I can see ServiceNow change request. So let's go ahead and let's copy this in. And what it's going to do, assuming everything I have is wired up correctly, go ahead and click on deploy, is it's going to pick it up. It's going to say, oh, this was approved, and I can go ahead and I can deploy this up to production. Now, what I can do is I can move this over to the review stage. Typically, you would wait, but let's move this over to the review stage. And we can add in some closure information. I can say this was successful, successful with issues, or unsuccessful. So if we had a rollback or anything, I can just say it looks good to me. And it should finish up pretty quickly. Most of the time you wouldn't be approving anything until you wouldn't be marking it as closed or setting the status until you've done some sort of verification or anything along those lines. Let's go ahead and click on close. And it is now done. So that change request is done, and it has finished up doing its deployment. So happy days all around. So that is how you get the ServiceNow integration configured, and that's how we can enforce the rule where it must go to a CAB, the change approval board, or must get approval before it even picks up the production deployment. One of the advantages to this is if I wanted to, I could schedule this deployment. Like I could have approval at, say, 11 a.m. and I could, if I pop in my change request number, assuming that that change request is valid, it's in a implement state, and then I could say, hey, I want to schedule this for 7 p.m. So this would be a pretty common use case where you'd already get the approval at 11 a.m. for the CAB, and then that's what you'd pop in and say, okay, don't recreate the change request number. I already got the approval for something like that. So that is really it for the ServiceNow integration and for integrating this type of approval process into Octopus Deploy. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next episode.